Now this one here is made out of concrete, so every year what we do is we just empty it out and we leave the top portion or the bowl on its side. In the last couple of seasons, I have learned something that I want to share with you. Hi, it's Steph, and this week I have been working on winterizing my garden, and in this video I'm going to share with you 5 steps that you can take to prepare your garden for winter. George is already outside clearing out some room in the shed for us to put away all of our outdoor furniture today. So we have this couch that we have to put away, as well as our dining table. All of the non-frost hardy pots have to get put away. So we are essentially putting the garden to bed for the winter. So I'm gonna go check and see what he's doing. And we gotta get working, get going. What is this contraption you're playing with?
Check it out.
What is this?
Remember, this is like the first lawnmower we purchased when we first moved in. I got this on Craigslist for like 20 bucks. And look, it still works great.
That's hilarious. It's like a manual, old school
It must
lawnmower.
be from the 80s because like the rims look like they're from a like 1984 Corvette. So this is definitely from the 80s.
Does it work well?
Yeah, look.
This is what happened.
It would probably take me 4 hours to cut the grass.
So, see, cleaning out the shed and you found this toy. This is kind of like when I go clean out my closet and I think it's going to take me an hour and
Same
then
thing.
I stop
All right,
finding.
so I'm getting distracted.
All right. How you doing in there though? Is it all
Pretty
cleared
good.
out?
Yeah, but we got to pull everything out in order to get everything back in.
So every year it's the same story. We have to pull, everything has to come out and then you start putting everything back in.
It's like Tetris.
Yeah, a puzzle. It's like a puzzle. So you try to be the most efficient you can be with your space. So first thing, the table.
Table right in the corner.
We got the table put away. Because it's the largest piece, we like to do that first, and we tucked it nice and tight into the corner. And the next thing that I like to do is go around and collect any garden decor pieces or statuary like I have here. This one in particular is concrete. It is a statue of a greyhound, which was for our late dog, a memorial that we have planted under our magnolia tree, and we keep this guy out there. But because it's concrete, I don't want it to crack over the winter with the frost thaw cycle, so I like to get these all stored. And putting away the table first is great because it provides me with a surface for me to be able to put all of my statuary on top of. And the next thing that I like to bring in for winter is any kind of garden bench. Now this one here is new this year that George bought for us for our anniversary, and it is made out of a composite material similar to a Trex decking, and it's supposed to be able to withstand the elements, so we're going to put it to the test by leaving it out year round. But we had another bench here on this patio that is now here behind me, and let me show you what happened to that. This steel bench we had on that patio there for about 4 or 5 seasons, and I would store it every winter into the shed, and then the last year I left it out year round. And I don't know if it was just time because it was getting older or the elements, but this did start to rust pretty badly. I put it back here in hopes that I might be able to repair it by spray painting it, but it is far beyond repair now. It's falling apart at the joints, so we will be getting rid of it. But if you do have any kind of bench that's made out of a metal material, it might be a good idea to store it for the winter to protect it from at least some moisture. The next thing that I like to take care of is our bird baths. Now this one here is made out of concrete, so every year what we do is we just empty it out and we leave the top portion or the bowl on its side. And what that does is it helps not collect water in it and freeze, because again, that frost thaw cycle is what will crack your concrete. And this water fountain bird bath that I have here on my patio, I'm also going to store for the winter. It is made out of a lightweight fiberglass material, which makes it really easy to pick up and store. And what I love about this is that I don't have a power source here in this bed, but it still allows me to have a water fountain because it is solar powered. So it has a solar panel and the pump, and it comes in 3 pieces, which makes it really easy to take apart and put away. And I can link it below if you have a similar situation and are looking for a solar powered fountain. All right, the bird baths and the fountains are put away. Now we are on to some other things. But look at this corner here. This morning when we started, I said that this was like Tetris or a puzzle to try to get it nice and tightly packed. And we want to be the most efficient we can be with the space. And I think we've done pretty well with that so far. I still have a couple more things to pack onto this table. But let me show you this corner here. You can see that we have a few surfaces here, and we're going to leave this here for a purpose. A couple of weeks ago, I posted a video about overwintering plants. And in my garden specifically, that is some Japanese maples that I have in pots and some potted roses that I cannot leave outside over the winter. So what I'm going to do is in a couple of weeks, once it gets more consistently cold out, I will bring them inside and put them here on these surfaces. And this is where I'm going to overwinter those plants. I am actually going to link the video that I posted a couple of weeks ago below if you want to check that out. And it goes through my whole process for overwintering potted plants. The next thing that I have to take care of is overwintering any planters or pots that are not frost resistant. And I have quite a few in my garden, and so that's what I'm going to work on next. Terracotta specifically here in the Northeast is not frost hardy, so if I left them outside, they would definitely crack. So I have these here that I'm going to leave in my shed, and if you have to have some as well, I would recommend storing them. If you don't have a shed, basement, or garage where you can put them, you can flip them upside down and leave them in a protected corner or maybe even under a deck. So I'm going to leave these here, and let's go ahead and take care of some of my other planters. We just got our outside sectional put away for the season, and we store it in our basement because we're limited on space in our shed. And thankfully our basement is large enough and had some room for us to tuck it into the corner, and the kids use it over the winter so that they can watch TV down there. So it works out. And the next thing that I have to do is these 3 planters that I had in the back of the couch here, I have to clear them out of all of the annuals that are now done and get the pots stored. So these annuals, we've had a couple of nights of frost, so they are done now, and you have a couple of options when you're cleaning out your planters. You can either take all of this debris or all of these dead plants and throw all of this, including the soil, into a compost pile, or you can just take out the plants and maybe the top third of soil that will have a lot of roots in it and dispose of them. Now, I don't have a compost pile, so what I'm going to do is take out all of the annuals as well as the first third or half of the soil that are in the planters and get rid of them, because there's a lot of roots from the growth this season. And what I'll do next season is I will refresh it with some new soil. And removing some of the soil will also allow you to stack the pots one inside the other, which will also save on space when you're storing them. These planters are nice and cleaned out now. I took out all of the annuals and I filter through with my fingers like this. I kind of just rake through, and anytime that I feel roots, I pull them up. Stuff that looks like this. And you do that so that your soil can be ready to be reused next season. And because it's expensive to refill your containers with soil, I try to keep as much of the soil as possible for as long as possible. But because I just replaced all of it this past spring, I can keep most of the soil in here and just replenish the top layer when I plant new plants in this container. And maybe just add a little bit of slow release fertilizer, and they are good to go. I have a couple more planters to clean up and put away here. Now this one here, I grew the Super Petunia Mini Vista Scarlet, and it was great. So I'll definitely grow that one again at some point. The petunia got really large and filled this whole planter. And you can see that there are a lot of roots in here. And when that begins to happen, the soil becomes hydrophobic. Because there's so many roots and not enough soil, it doesn't hold on to any moisture. So that's when you know it is time to get rid of the soil and start from scratch. So I won't be able to save this pot of soil, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. It is the next day, and yesterday we lost light quickly, but I was able to finish cleaning up the pots that I was working on. I stored some of them in the shed on top of the table, and then I took the rest of them and put them in the basement. But then I had these 2 planters here that I decided I would clean out as well, and they are plastic, so I can leave them outside year round. But as I was cleaning out the annuals, I noticed that the soil had become pretty root bound and was also hydrophobic, so it needed to be replaced. So I dumped out all of the soil and the annuals that were in them. I'm going to get rid of this, and I'm going to refill these planters with some fresh potting soil, because in the next week or 2 I am going to plant some spring blooming bulbs. So that's the plan for these, and today I'm going to work on a few more things, but next is putting away our garden hoses. Now, if you're newer to gardening, or maybe you just bought a new home, you might not be sure why you have to put your hoses away for the winter. If you're experienced, you probably already know this, but really quickly, the reason you want to remove your hoses for the winter is because you don't want to leave any water in the pipe for your spigot as well as in your hose over winter, because with the freezing temperatures, you can damage your pipe, it can crack, and you can also damage your hose. So for that reason, what we want to do is disconnect everything, drain all of the water out, which will prevent that water from freezing in the pipe and in the hose, and it'll also make your hose lighter to carry for storage. Now, I have 3 hoses altogether in my garden. I have a traditional hose down in my raised bed garden, and I have 2 of these retractable hoses, which I never had a retractable hose before. There's quite a few of them on the market. This one happens to be by Vigo, and it is the 100-foot length, and I have loved this season because it's been really easy to drag the hose wherever I want, and it's not messy. It's very easy to clean up by just retracting it back to its casing. But I do have to go ahead and drain all of the water out to make this casing a lot easier to pick up and put away for storage. So let's disconnect the supply hose from the spigot. Now I'm going to remove the hose nozzle, and both ends are disconnected, which will allow the water to drip out. And I'm going to pull the hose out 100 feet and retract it back in, and that will squeeze any additional water out of my hose. All right, and now I'm going to put my nozzle back on so that I don't lose it or misplace it over the winter. And then I can lift my casing to put it away in storage. But one of the most important things that you don't want to forget is to shut off your water supply or your main supply to your spigot inside the house. When getting the garden ready for winter, there's something else to consider. Which plants will you cut back in fall, and which will you leave until spring? In my garden, there are 3 categories of plants that I like to cut back in fall. They are any plants that will start emerging early in the spring and that will start sending up its foliage, any plants that are diseased or have gotten powdery mildew, and any plants that are aggressive self-seeders. And let me show you some examples of those. Salvia. This one here is a perennial salvia called May Night. It blooms for me around May, so I will go through right now and cut them down to about 2 inches above the soil, and that way it'll be ready to push out all of its new growth come spring. Nepeta, also known as catmint, is another one that will bloom really early for me in the spring, and I have them all along my front borders, and you can see that it is now done for the season. Still has a little bit of green growth on it, but I'm going to go through and clean up all of my Nepeta. Peonies are another perennial that I cut back in fall. They sometimes get diseased foliage and some powdery mildew, so that's one reason to cut them back, but they're also a spring bloomer. So I went through and I cut back all of the foliage on my peonies. I do leave up the support cages so that they have support once they start growing. And you can see that this one has already started to push out some eyes for next year's blooms. Ornamental grasses. Now this one is subject to your opinion because some people like to leave them up over the winter to provide habitat for wildlife and to provide some winter interest. But in my experience, I find that they tend to dry out over the winter. They become straw-like, and with the winter winds, they start blowing around all over the yard and get quite messy. Another reason is that these start to push out new foliage early on in the spring. This variety here, the Carl Forester. And last year I got to them a little bit too late, and I had some new growth with the old growth, and by the time I cut them back to kind of even things out, my grass did not grow as tall as it should have been. The Carl Forester gets to be about 4 feet in height, and this season, because I cut them back too late, they only grew about 30 inches or so. So for that reason, I'm choosing to go ahead and cut back my taller ornamental grasses in the fall. And the next category of plants that I cut back in fall in my garden are anything that get diseased or powdery mildew. So I've already cut back all of my peonies, which at the end of the season can get pretty rough looking and are susceptible to things like powdery mildew. And I've also cut back bee balm, which is another one that gets pretty bad powdery mildew. And the last one that I have to go through and cut back in this category is phlox. So this variety of phlox that I have here is the fashionably early crystal. It tends to get pretty bad powdery mildew, so I'm going to go through through and cut all of these phlox down to about 2 inches above the soil. And in my garden, the last category of plants that I cut back in fall are aggressive self-seeders. And for me, those are plants like Rudbeckia, which I've already cut back. I had a stand of them here and at the end of this bed. And just a few weeks back when they were done blooming and started to form all of their seed heads, I went through and cut them back. And another one is Rose Campion. It is really beautiful, but I have found that in my garden, it is an aggressive self-seeder. So again, another one that was back here that I cut back as soon as it started to form its seeds. But it is a good idea to leave some plants up over the winter to provide food and a home for any kind of wildlife like birds and bugs to have a habitat to overwinter in. And I do like to leave things up like my coneflowers. They have these really beautiful seed heads that not only provide winter interest, but that birds can feed on the seeds over the winter. And in the fall, not only do I clean out any annuals that I grew in containers and planters, I also go through and clean up any annuals that I grew out in the landscape. And here on my front walkway border, every year for the last 3 years, I have grown this beautiful annual called Gomphrena. And it is absolutely beautiful and I love it. It lasted for a really long time, but we recently had 2 nights of frost and it is now done. So I'm going to go through and cut these and clean them all up. I'm also going to collect seeds so I can show you how that is done. But in the last couple of seasons, I have learned something that I want to share with you. In the past, when I would pull out my annuals from the garden, I would just go through and pull them right at the base, and what that would do is yank out roots and all and leave me a really large hole in the soil that I would then have to go through and refill with some more soil. So what I've been doing instead since last season is I go through and I take my pruners, and right at the base of the plant, I just cut it level with the soil, just like that. And I leave the roots in there to break down and feed my soil. So the best part is that I now do not have a large hole that I have to refill. It's much easier. And to collect seeds from my Gomphrena, what you'll do is just cut off the bloom heads. So some of these still have some purple color and some of them have gotten a bit more faded like this, but they will eventually all dry to look like this. So once you cut off all of the bloom heads, you want to just stick them in a bag. And here I'm just using a paper grocery bag, and you'll keep it open in a cool, dark, dry place. So I'm going to keep them in my basement. And in the spring, when it is time for you to sow these seeds, what you can do is you can go in the bag. Some of the seeds will already start falling in the bag, and any that haven't, you can just take your bloom head, and it's very easy. You just pull the seeds right off. Look at that. These are all Gomphrena seeds. Now, when it is time to sow these seeds, what you'll do is you'll take your seeds and you'll soak them in some water for about 24 hours before you sow them. And what that will do is break down this chaff and make it easier for the seeds to germinate. But very easy to collect Gomphrena seeds, and you can see how many seeds you get from just one of these bloom heads. A ton. In case you're wondering, why not just leave the seeds on the ground that drop from the plants and let them germinate by themselves, right? Well, I have been growing Gomphrena for about 3 years now, and in all that time, they have never germinated by themselves or self-seeded. So I do have to collect my seeds and start new plants each year. The next thing on my list is to provide some insulation to the root balls of my plants. So anything that doesn't have any mulch on it, I'm going to go through and add a layer of mulch, and any plants that maybe have settled and now the soil is exposing the top of the root ball, I will go ahead and add some more compost to them. So right here, I need to add some mulch. On the topic of offering some winter protection for your plants is also covering plants, specifically plants that might not be completely hardy in your zone. Here in my case, I have a Chinese fringe flower, which is hardy to a zone 7, and I garden in a zone 6B, 7A. But here in New England, our weather can fluctuate wildly in the winter. And last year, it was the first season that I had this shrub in my garden, so I did cover it with this winter shrub cover. And it came through the winter beautifully and has put on quite a bit of size. Now we're going into season 2, and I'm going to cover it again to make sure that it survives the winter. Some more examples of that would be any plant that you maybe just recently planted in your garden that is not yet established, or anything that might be only on the cusp of being hardy in your garden. And to know that, you would have to know your gardening zone, which you can Google, and know what plant you're dealing with. Some examples of plants that sometimes can benefit from protection are things like figs. If you have them in a pot, you can just bring them into a basement, a garage, or a shed to offer them some protection. Or if they're planted in the landscape, you can wrap them with some burlap or a tarp. And another example is macrophylla type hydrangeas, or the big leaf or mop type hydrangeas. Those, if the buds get zapped by frost or really cold freezing temperatures, it could kill off the bud, which would risk you not getting any blooms that year. So those are examples of some shrubs that could benefit from some protection. And again, you can use burlap or you can use a shrub cover such as this. I hope that this video was helpful to you, and I just want to take a moment to thank you all so much for watching my videos and for leaving me wonderful comments. I was taking a look at my analytics the other day, and I noticed that only 15% of the people who regularly watch my videos are subscribed to my channel. And I just want to ask you to subscribe if you watch my content regularly and you find it entertaining or helpful. And I really don't like to ask for people to subscribe or to hit the like button or to leave me a comment, but all of those things really are free to do and help my channel grow. So I thank you all so much in advance. And it's hard to believe that another season has already come and gone, but we are going to be back in the garden in the spring before we know it. Before then, I still have a ton of beautiful spring bulbs to plant, and I'll be working on that in the next couple of weeks. So thank you so much for spending your time with me, and I will catch you in the next one.